Here's exactly how to use it correctly so you actually get the effect the research demonstrates. The dose used in most studies is 1 to 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar diluted in at least 8 ounces of water, a full large glass. You drink this mixture 10 to 20 minutes before your largest meal of the day, which for most people is lunch or dinner. This timing is intentional. You want the acetic acid present and active in your digestive system before the carbohydrates from your meal begin arriving. Always diluted. Undiluted apple cider vinegar is acidic enough to damage tooth enamel and cause real irritation to your esophagus if consumed straight repeatedly over time. Drinking it through a straw minimizes contact with your teeth, and rinsing your mouth with plain water after is a simple protective habit worth adopting. The apple cider vinegar you want is raw and unfiltered, the kind with the mother, which is the cloudy sediment-like material you'll see floating at the bottom of the bottle. The mother contains beneficial enzymes and bacteria, and this is the form used in most research and recommended by most practitioners. Brands like Bragg are widely available and typically cost between $3 and $5. This is one of the most cost-effective metabolic tools in existence, and the barrier to starting is almost zero. Third, vinegar slows gastric emptying, the rate at which food moves from your stomach into your small intestine, producing a longer, more gradual energy release instead of a rapid glucose surge. Slower glucose rise means a lower insulin peak, and a lower insulin peak means your body returns to baseline faster and spends more time in the fat-burning window between meals. Each of these mechanisms is modest on its own, but together, practiced consistently before meals over weeks and months, the compound effect on your average daily insulin levels becomes significant. Now, let's be completely precise about what this means and what it doesn't mean, because clarity here matters. Drinking apple cider vinegar is not going to dissolve fat, melt inches off your waist, or replace a healthy eating pattern. That is not what the research shows, and it is not what this is claiming. What the research does suggest is that strategic, consistent use of apple cider vinegar before meals can meaningfully blunt the insulin response to those meals. And when you reduce insulin spikes consistently, meal after meal, day after day, week after week, you shift your body's average hormonal environment toward a state that favors fat release over fat storage. The person who spikes insulin hard at every meal versus the person who consistently moderates those spikes are living in fundamentally different metabolic realities, even if their calorie counts look identical on paper. The researchers concluded that acetic acid appears to improve insulin sensitivity and meaningfully reduce the postprandial insulin spike, the sharp hormonal surge that follows eating. And the biology behind why this works is genuinely fascinating once you understand it. Acetic acid does several things simultaneously inside your body, and each one contributes to a lower, slower, more controlled insulin response. First, it interferes with specific digestive enzymes called disaccharidases. These are the enzymes responsible for breaking down complex carbohydrates into simple sugars inside your small intestine. When those enzymes are partially inhibited, carbohydrates convert to glucose more slowly and gradually instead of all at once. Glucose enters the bloodstream in a controlled, measured stream, rather than a sudden flood, and a gradual glucose rise means your pancreas doesn't need to dump a massive wave of insulin to deal with it. Second, acetic acid appears to activate AMPK, adenosine monophosphate activated protein kinase, which scientists sometimes refer to as the body's master metabolic switch. AMPK activation is associated with improved glucose uptake directly into muscle cells, reduced fat storage signaling, and increased fat oxidation at the cellular level. Here's what makes that remarkable. AMPK is the exact same pathway that gets activated by exercise and by caloric restriction, and acetic acid appears to partially mimic those effects biochemically. Your body lowers your metabolism to compensate for the calorie deficit you're creating, ramps up hunger hormones to push you to eat more, reduces your energy so you move less, and all of that happens before it will freely burn stored fat. This is not a personal failure. This is your body's survival machinery working exactly as designed in an environment it was never built for. The solution is not to punish yourself harder. The solution is to change the hormonal signal. Now let's talk about the $3 trick that makes this change accessible to anyone starting today. The ingredient is apple cider vinegar. A large bottle costs about $3 at most grocery stores and lasts for weeks. But forget the wellness trend version of this. Forget the influencers doing morning ACV shots for glowing skin or alkalizing their bodies or whatever the latest claim is. This is about what happens inside your digestive system and your cells when acetic acid, the active compound in apple cider vinegar, is present before you eat a carbohydrate-containing meal. A study published in the peer-reviewed journal Diabetes Care examined exactly this question in a controlled setting. Participants who consumed a diluted vinegar solution before a high-carbohydrate meal showed significantly lower blood glucose and insulin levels after eating compared to participants who didn't. That is the actual mechanism of fat loss. Not willpower, not starvation, not endless cardio, just insulin dropping low enough for your body to access what it's already stored. But here's the devastating reality for most people living in the modern world. Insulin almost never gets the chance to drop. Picture a completely typical day for the average person in America. Breakfast, a bowl of cereal, a piece of toast, a glass of juice. Insulin spikes. Mid-morning, a little hunger kicks in, so there's a granola bar or a coffee with sweetened creamer. Insulin spikes again. Lunch is a sandwich with chips and maybe a soda, another aggressive insulin surge. An afternoon slump hits, so there's a snack, maybe something from the vending machine. Insulin climbs before it ever had a chance to fall. Dinner is a full carbohydrate-heavy meal, followed a few hours later by a late-night snack because sleep is hard on an empty stomach. Insulin stays elevated deep into the night. By the time the body finally starts seeing insulin return toward baseline, it's 3 a.m. and the alarm goes off at 6. This is chronic insulin elevation, and it is the hidden driver behind the stubborn fat that simply refuses to leave no matter what you do. When insulin is chronically high, your body doesn't just store fat, it actively resists releasing it, because physiologically it believes it's in a state of constant energy abundance. This isn't a sales pitch, it isn't a fad, and it isn't wishful thinking. It's basic metabolic biology, and by the end of this, you'll understand exactly how to use it. Let's start with the most important thing you need to understand about your own body. Insulin is not your enemy. It's a hormone your pancreas produces every single time you eat, especially in response to carbohydrates and sugar. Its job is critical. It pulls glucose out of your bloodstream and delivers it into your cells, where it's converted into usable energy. Without insulin functioning properly, blood glucose would rise to dangerous levels and begin destroying your nerves, your organs, and your blood vessels. So insulin is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. The problem is what happens when it never gets a chance to come back down. When insulin is elevated, your body receives one loud, overriding biological signal: store energy, do not release it. Think of insulin as a padlock on your fat cells. When it's high, that lock is fully engaged, and your fat cells are physically unable to release the stored energy inside them. Fat burning, the technical term is lipolysis, can only begin when insulin drops low enough for that lock to open. Once insulin falls, your fat cells release stored fatty acids into the bloodstream. Those fatty acids travel to your muscles and liver, and they get burned as fuel. You've been eating less, moving more, cutting calories, skipping dessert, and the fat still won't move. You're not lazy, you're not broken, and you are absolutely not imagining it. The problem isn't your willpower, and it isn't your genetics either. The real reason your body is holding on to fat has nothing to do with how hard you're trying. It has everything to do with one hormone most people never think about. That hormone is insulin, and right now it may be the only thing standing between you and the body you've been working toward. Here's what makes this even more frustrating. Almost nobody in the mainstream health space is talking about it honestly. They keep pushing the same recycled advice. Eat less, move more, track your macros, buy this supplement, try this detox. None of that addresses the root problem. And until the root problem is addressed, the fat isn't going anywhere. But here's the part that should give you real hope. There is a $3 trick, backed by peer-reviewed science, that directly signals your body to lower insulin fast. When insulin drops, something switches inside your body. A lock that's been keeping your fat cells sealed shut finally opens. Your fat cells release stored energy into your bloodstream. Your muscles burn it for fuel, and the fat loss process that's been blocked finally activates.
But here is the honest truth you also need to hear. Apple cider vinegar alone is not enough to fully overcome chronically elevated insulin if the rest of your lifestyle is driving it up constantly. It blunts the spike. It does not eliminate the problem if insulin is being pushed sky-high every few hours by repeated refined carbohydrate consumption all day long. To genuinely shift your hormonal environment toward consistent fat burning, you need to understand everything else that drives insulin up and address those things systematically. The single largest driver of chronic insulin elevation in the modern diet is not fat, and it's not even total calories. It's refined carbohydrates and added sugar consumed frequently throughout the day with little to no fiber, protein, or fat to slow their absorption. White bread, white rice, sweetened cereals, fruit juice, low-fat flavored yogurt, crackers, chips, energy bars marketed as healthy. These foods convert to glucose rapidly, trigger aggressive insulin responses, and eaten multiple times a day, they keep insulin perpetually elevated. When you eat these foods repeatedly without meaningful gaps between eating, insulin never truly returns to baseline before the next spike begins, and the fat-burning window never fully opens. Reducing the frequency and intensity of refined carbohydrate consumption is the most direct lever you have for lowering average daily insulin levels. One of the most powerful strategies you can layer on top of dietary changes is extending your natural overnight fasting window. Even a 12 to 14-hour gap, finishing dinner at 7 in the evening and not eating again until 7 or 9 the next morning, gives insulin hours of uninterrupted time to fall to its lowest natural baseline. During that extended fasting window, with insulin consistently low, your body shifts its fuel source away from glucose and toward stored fat. This is the actual mechanism behind why intermittent fasting produces real results for so many people. It is not magic, it is not starvation, and it has nothing to do with skipping breakfast being inherently special. It is simply insulin physics, and longer gaps between meals create the hormonal conditions your body needs to burn what it's stored. Protein is one of the most underutilized metabolic tools available to you, and prioritizing it at every meal is one of the smartest moves you can make. Protein does stimulate some insulin release, but it simultaneously triggers glucagon, a counter-regulatory hormone that signals your fat cells to release stored energy and works in direct opposition to insulin's storage effect. The net hormonal result of a protein-rich meal is dramatically more favorable for fat loss than the same calorie count from refined carbohydrates, even though both technically stimulate insulin. Beyond the hormonal advantage, protein extends satiety for hours, which naturally reduces snacking between meals and eliminates the low-grade but constant insulin spikes that come from grazing all day. Every meal built around a solid protein foundation is a meal that works in your metabolic favor. Fiber operates through a mechanism remarkably similar to acetic acid. It slows the rate at which glucose from food enters your bloodstream and reduces the insulin demand on your pancreas. Vegetables, legumes, whole intact grains, nuts, seeds, and berries add physical bulk and viscosity to the contents of your digestive tract that acts like a brake on glucose absorption. Eating fiber-rich foods before or alongside carbohydrates at a meal is one of the simplest, most evidence-backed ways to flatten your glucose curve and reduce insulin spikes without eliminating any specific food group entirely. The order in which you eat your food at a meal actually matters. Eating vegetables and protein before starches and sugars produces a measurably lower glucose and insulin response than eating them in reverse order. Exercise, particularly resistance training and brief walking after meals, activates an insulin-independent pathway for glucose uptake directly into your muscle cells. When your muscles are actively working and pulling glucose from the bloodstream on their own, your pancreas doesn't need to release nearly as much insulin to clear that glucose from circulation. A 10 to 20-minute walk after eating can produce a measurably lower postprandial glucose and insulin spike compared to sitting completely still after the same meal. This one simple habit, practiced consistently, represents significant insulin savings every single day. Resistance training builds muscle tissue over time, and more muscle means a larger, more metabolically active reservoir for glucose storage, reducing insulin demand every single day, even at rest. Sleep is the most underappreciated and most frequently neglected variable in insulin sensitivity, and the research on this is unambiguous and sobering. Even 1 or 2 nights of poor sleep, consistently under 6 hours, measurably impairs insulin sensitivity the following day, meaning your cells become less responsive to insulin signal and your pancreas has to produce more of it to achieve the same glucose-clearing effect. More insulin released means higher average insulin levels throughout the entire following day, not just at night, but every hour after a bad night's sleep. Chronic sleep deprivation is one of the fastest documented routes to insulin resistance, and protecting your sleep is not a lifestyle luxury. It is a direct metabolic intervention. Chronic stress elevates cortisol, cortisol raises blood glucose, elevated blood glucose triggers insulin release, and this cycle, running quietly in the background of a high-pressure modern life, is one of the most invisible drivers of stubborn fat accumulation. Belly fat in particular is directly associated with chronically elevated cortisol and insulin, and no amount of dieting or exercise fully overcomes a stress response that is running constantly in the background. Stress management is not soft wellness advice reserved for people who do yoga. It is a hard, documented metabolic strategy with measurable effects on your hormonal environment. Now let's bring everything back together and see what the full picture actually looks like when you stack all of these strategies intentionally. Apple cider vinegar blunts the insulin response to your meals. 1 to 2 tablespoons diluted 10 to 20 minutes before eating. Reducing refined carbohydrates lowers the total insulin demand across your entire day. Extending your overnight fasting window gives insulin hours to fall to true baseline, opening the fat-burning window every single night. Prioritizing protein at every meal shifts the hormonal balance of your meals toward fat release rather than fat storage. Eating fiber before carbohydrates slows glucose absorption and flattens the insulin curve at every meal. Walking for 10 to 20 minutes after eating pulls glucose into muscles without insulin and dramatically reduces postprandial spikes. Resistance training builds the metabolic infrastructure that makes your body more insulin sensitive every day. Protecting your sleep ensures your cells remain insulin responsive and your pancreas isn't forced into overdrive every morning. Managing stress closes the cortisol-glucose-insulin loop that silently drives fat accumulation regardless of what you eat. None of these is a miracle on its own, but every single one works through the same fundamental biological mechanism. Lower insulin, longer time spent below the fat-burning threshold, more hours per day where the lock on your fat cells is open. Stack them together, practice them consistently, and the cumulative effect on your hormonal environment is profound. Not because anything here is exotic or expensive, but because all of it is real biology working in the same direction at the same time. You already have a body that is fully capable of burning fat efficiently. It was designed to do exactly that. The only thing that's been stopping it is a hormonal environment that never gives it the chance. Change the signal and the body responds. Start tonight. 1 tablespoon of raw, unfiltered apple cider vinegar in a large glass of water, 20 minutes before your biggest meal. $3. 1 habit. Real biology. That's where it begins.